Hello everyone. I'm so excited that you decided to join today's presentation of the Fall/Winter 26 footwear trends. Uh, let's begin with this slide. I'm Julia. I'm head of trends at Livetrend, and I'll be guiding you through all of the macro concepts, the key materials, shapes, colors, and the details that are going to define the upcoming season. I know here we're still looking at a lot of spring/summer 26, and please do not hesitate to take a look at this beautiful trend area that we have created with Livetrend in collaboration with Linnea Pelle. But let's already jump one season ahead to have a bit more of an outlook on the future. Briefly, I want to start with a quick introduction on Livetrend. We are actually pioneering in trend forecasting. What does that mean? We turn millions of data into actionable insights. We have developed our own algorithms that are like spiders, scraping the internet, and therefore we combine a variety of sources. We go through millions of information on e-commerces, on fashion shows, on Instagram, and also on consumer searches, and we co-reference or cross-reference all of this information to create forecasts that are as reliable as can be. And we also combine that with human expertise, with cultural knowledge, and fashion experts, as I mentioned, in order to create a 360-degree vision of the market. And like this, we can not only track trends as they emerge, but we can also understand their trajectory. That means we can see how is a trend evolving, when is it hitting which market, what is its commercial potential, and how is it going to pan out, how long does it last? And we can really make the right assumptions. We have an accuracy rate of 93%, which is outstanding, and which helps decision makers to really stop the guessworking and to have forecasts that are way more reliable and that help to structure better assortments that produce less overstock and that are creating better margins. So with MiCam, we started from ready-to-wear, but to establish also our algorithms for the footwear industry. So now we can track all of the details from the toe shapes, the materials, the sole, the upper, etc. to gather all of this accurate information also specifically for the footwear industry. We are not just pioneering when it comes to tracking trends with artificial intelligence, but we are also using generative AI to demonstrate our forecast. Because we are able to kind of look for or spot the right ingredients, we can then use our experts to prompt them into the right images of the future. So of course the images of the future don't really exist, but we can manage to kind of create them now with generative AI in order to have a better understanding of what these successful future collections will look like. Today you will have a wide array of generative AI images as well, so be aware some of the images in the presentation have been done artificially. And just to mention, for our forecasting, we're basing ourselves usually a lot on consumer search interest. You will find a percentage that is describing a yearly growth index, which means how have consumer searches for a specific trend increased over the time span of the previous year or the past year. And this is giving us a bit of an outlook on the trajectory of the trend for future seasons. And I also highlighted a couple of so-called star products, because at Livetrend we also managed to track a bit of the product performance by calculating how quickly a product is getting out of stock on the e-commerces, restocked, and understanding what is put on sale, etc., what has worked well on the e-commerces, what is sought after, and exactly. So let us already dive in now into the fall/winter macro trends. I know you'll be with me now for the next 30 minutes. It's a long time listening to my voice, but I have brought a lot of super interesting trends, and I hope you'll be able to deep dive into the future with me. So we always select a general theme for a season, and we have discovered or decoded with a team of experts that for fall/winter 26, we're diving into this concept of primal renaissance. So I'm just reading it there. It's like instinct meeting innovation. We'll be in a time that is somewhere stuck between chaos and renewal. So it's a bit of this weird momentum where we are not in the past, but also not yet in the future. And it's accepting that without the past, we can't have the future, and we can't have the future without the past. So it's really this like dual concept, and finding ourselves in this weird in-between state where we have to be aware that there's no certainty, that we're sitting with the chaos, and that we have to like experience these complex and weirded out emotions and just concentrate on something that gives us direction and guidance, and that is our primal human core, and that is our humanity. It's about reconnecting with our instincts, with things that make us feel deeply human and that are really, giving us a bit of escape in a time where everything seems very controlled, very polished, very much, like repressed, and we're trying to unleash again. Everything that we've held back over the past season seems to be exploding. It's embracing all of this variety of emotion and letting go of that leash, let's say. We have 4 big macro trends that next season you'll also see in the trend area on the sides, and all of them are really about this idea of reconnecting to authenticity, of finding our true selves, the true meaning behind things again, and to propel us in the future. But because we have a little bit of like a time crunch, I'm just going to jump right in. So the first trend is bucolic slumber. I'm reading it here, like bucolic slumber is rooted in a deep return to slowness that reflects a craving for stability and connection with designs that feel heritage-loaded and worn-in. You can see when we look at the consumer searches that there is a lot of interest in the themes that give us this idea of simplicity, a simpler living, living on the countryside, like folk, slow life, workwear, etc. We also see the fisherman core that is currently trending online and definitely reconnecting to a lot of this new-grown interest in blue-collar jobs. When we look at the bucolic slumber mood board, here also you can see very much this like interplay between like generative AI and like the real moody images. With bucolic slumber, we're really trying to escape this accelerated and overstimulated life that we're living in. So we're always trying to achieve for more, be better, have more, like it's constant stress, constant pressure. We need to be performing, we need to be achieving. And within this trend, we're really trying to reconnect with something a bit more grounding. I was yesterday explaining this concept of anemoia, where we're longing for a past that we ourselves have not lived through. And I feel like it's the same here. We see big interest of consumers moving back to the countryside, looking, as I said, into more blue-collar careers. And it's really about reconnecting with something that feels a bit more worn in, homey, comfy, and that seems to be like embracing slowness. And I think it's funny how in these days it seems to be such a radical idea to just understand that slowness, not doing so much, is enough. And it's really about accepting this, about opting out of the system. When we look at the color palette, we can see this coming through. A lot of important shades for the upcoming seasons come from this, let's say, highland greenery. We got the olive, the khaki. We got a lot of shades that remind us of autumnal fall leaves and these classic color palettes that gives us a lot of soothing and familiarity. We got the crimson red that it adds a little bit more of warmth here, as well as a lot of these Ivy League primary colors like the navy blue, the green, and the red. When looking at the bucolic slumber upcoming materials, you can see a new interest in warming textures. So we have boiled wools, felt, and even these knits that we saw in the Prada show that give us a bit of this bucolic, familiar country feel. When we look at leathers, full grains feel very sturdy, while suede is giving us a bit of this tactile sensation that makes us, connect a bit to slower paces, living on the countryside. Looking at the details, we have a bit of a duality here. On one hand, we continue with the welt seam, the mock toe that we have known now in the past seasons from like the boat shoe and the wallaby, but also the wooden sole that has emerged over a couple of the last fashion shows as an interesting new piece that makes us feel like self-sufficiency, gardening, very much rural living, as well as when we look at this concept that feels very like British heritage, we also have the brogue detail and these vintage cutouts that give us a bit of this like vintage dainty effect. So today we made a quick select, or a bit of like a shortened selection about the key pieces for men and women, and stay tune to the end so you have an understanding of how to connect with Livetrend and have everything and always stay ahead of the curve. But let's jump into these bucolic slumber must-haves for women. We still stick to the knee boot. This equestrian boot still resonates super well with consumers. They still have 200% increases in their searches for the product. We got also the Wellington rain boot that is opting from a utility piece into something stylish. Even if you look at the For Love and Lemons interpretation with the lace, it's a very charming way to, even pick up on the current treadwife trend, everything going very countryside-o. Then something interesting when we look at these high vamp block heels. So this is an interesting option for the pump that seems very bucolic and back to the past. But it's been a star product. So we see the higher vamp is really gaining traction. And despite the fact that here maybe we don't look yet at huge quantities, but they attract a lot of interest from consumers. And it's a very comfy product, easy to wear, very versatile. The Mary Jane has also stood out over the past winter season, and for the next seasons can be interpreted with a bit of a playful touch by adding a bit more, constructed or complex cutouts or this crisscross detailing that you can see here. Looking at men, we have a star product of the previous season with the Wallaby, opting for this a bit more rustic welt seam. And if we look at a lot of the street style websites, you can see it resonates super well with younger cohorts who have an interest in nostalgia and authenticity. The apron toe also transferred to a Chelsea boot, gets a bit more of a chic upgrade there. And now we look at some other trends or shapes in this style that feel a bit more, let's say, countryside. When we look at the brogue with this natural toe, so that's all about feeling comfortable, at ease, turning to something very not constructing but liberating. And the suede lace-up boot has also been a highlight, so everything lace-up, combat-inspired, has performed super well recently. And then, of course, with the suede upgrade gets a bit of this like countryside touch. Jumping already into our second trend, which is the exact opposite, we have lavish subversion. So lavish subversion explores a sense of rebellious maximalism, dripping in humor, nostalgia, and the polarization of absurd and chic. And it's not about polish, it's about play. I think this trend is so very interesting if we look at the past season where old money has driven us into the quiet luxury trend. Here we look at loud luxury. So everything, when we look at the keywords that consumers are looking at, is more mindset. We have maximalism, kitsch, twee, retro glam, dollcore. It's really about embracing our need to indulge again. It's a time where we allow ourselves to be playful again, to break free from this control and construction that we experience a lot in society. And it's allowing us to really lash out and be fun and bold and flirt and, just have a bit more freedom to explore our identity. We're letting go of subtlety. It's a bit of this shift back to maximalism. And when we look at the mood board, you can see this very well. It's embracing familiar elements, but spicing them up with that teeny twist that makes it so, refreshing and new. We see this big interest of people or of young people in vintage clothing and thrifting and, just clashing eras. We have this messy girl aesthetic that is currently trending that gives us a bit of this also frazzled English woman trend. I know I'm just shooting a lot of these fancy trending keywords at you at the moment. But it's all about the idea that things don't have to be perfect, and that links to this initial concept of embracing our primal imperfections and not polishing over reality. When looking at the color palette, we see this coming through this little duality, this interplay of perfection, but also of retro familiarity and chicness. So we got the resurgence or the continuation of the burgundy trend. We're moving a bit more into these plummy shades. So plum is something to definitely keep into consideration. Lots of commercial potential, especially for these fall-winter seasons. So these colors seem very retro. They give us a lot of grounding. Then we have some juicy poppy pastels that are, injecting some fun in here, some lightness, and a bit of this playfulness, as well as the light green and the light blue that adds some sporty youthfulness as well. So when looking at the materials, we continue with a bit more elegant materials that can be integrated into daywear. We have satin and velvet that have resonated very well recently, even in summer with consumers. Even more indulgent, we got these crocodile embossing as a new take on animal that we saw also obviously after the cheetah print boom, catching on very well with consumers, as well as this like multi-panel color blocking that can invite individuality, play, and the interesting take on retro sports footwear. When looking at the details, we had some very eccentric materials beside these very opulent embellishment that turn, a shoe into some very maximalist, like fanciful object. We have rather classic, elegant details like the sling bag or the T-strap that take us a bit to this nostalgic escapism, or these fancy buckles that reference all of these like elevated luxury aesthetics. So quickly on the women's selection here. So a star product of the previous season was the T-strap pump, which combines, interestingly, the pointy pump that has been a recent success with the detail of the Mary Jane, or this like vintage lady footwear. Similarly, vintage lady is this like peep toe slingback pump or dancing shoe, which I think is very interesting because we saw a 300% growth of this product on the e-commerces recently after the Miu Miu collection. And it's very fun. It feels very ladylike and maybe 50s, 60s, but it's a very fun new product to experiment with. Then we got the pointy flat. That reminds us a bit of a house slipper, feeling a bit like taken from the hotel, but rebellious in its authenticity, and especially with satin, of course, getting a bit of an evening-ready boudoir upgrade. And not to forget mentioning, there's also this like sock-like block-heel boot as another interesting take on the trending knee boot that you can see with 750% has really raised an interest in the market. And with this boot, definitely catching up a bit on the mod and twee aesthetics that have already grasped on the market in the past season. For men, we keep looking at these retro sneakers. As we already discussed yesterday in our sneaker must-haves, we see that they are getting more stylized, lower in profile, slimmer in the sole, more elegant. The loafer has been a star product, and with these new animal textures, getting a bit of this maximalist edge, still staying commercial for the men's market. We see generally there is a decline in these evening lace-up shoes like the Derby, but if we look at these super fancy elongated Oxford shoes that we saw in the fashion shows, they get so much of a specific outstanding identity character that they regain interest for a product range. And for men as well, we have the house slipper as an interesting piece, especially if we look at the last shows of Gucci or Dior, pushing them as a new fashion statement. So, jumping into primal futurism, that is obviously, if you already look at the name, the most connected to this general theme, that reconnection to our primal instincts. So primal futurism builds a future from the fragments of the past. It is not a fantasy of high-shine innovation, but a future that feels earthen, elemental, and engineered for endurance. When we look at the keywords of this trend, you can see everything that screams paleo, elemental, primal, resonating very well with consumers. It's coming through also when we look at interior design, when we look at changes in diet, etc. But at the same time, we still try and keep that futuristic, open-minded mindset that we need to embrace, of course, that we live in this bit more of an urban terrain and obviously not in the forest somewhere. But still underscoring this trend, we have the nomadic movement, a reconnection to nature, a reconnection to our instincts. So this trend, I think, is a very strong reaction to what we see happening with AI infiltrating our day-to-day lives. So everything feels so very digital that we try and seek for things that make us feel human, that make things feel real and authentic. And obviously, when we look at this very primal heritage of ourselves, we can feel this connection to the earth. We can feel that there's something real to cling on to without having to fear that we're fading off everything into the AI universe. So it's a very interesting combination between, let's say, industrialism, and natural ingredients to create a nice new concept for the future. When we look at the color palette, this is coming through as well. We have a lot of grounding natural shapes like the brown, the stone tints, and everything feels a bit like windswept, washed out, weathered. You know, like the colors have just gone through a bit of like a storm, or have been like, I don't know, digged out from the sand, so everything a bit like foggy and subtle. But then we've got these zesty brights like the lime, or this very zesty pale yellow that give us a bit of this like innovative, futuristic ting, and that make the trend feel a bit more refreshing and renewed. So looking at the materials, we have a bit of this duality as well. We got an interesting new material with the ostrich that we saw also in the Acne Studio show, for example, as a big standout piece. It's increasing with 400%. Obviously, authentically, it's very rare, but that clings on, I think, to the concept as well, because it gets a bit of this archaeological, fossil-inspired momentum that connects so well to this, elemental, sedimental part of the trend. We still go on with natural materials, or, like animal, whether real or fake, inspired materials like the pony or the catto print. And of course, after the recent drop of the Samba shoe in pony hair, they have spiked up and gained a lot of commercial potential. And now we've got these matte and waxed kind of finishes and treatments that kind of pulsate between natural sleekness, serenity, and something that still seems like very clean and future ready. So looking at the details, the duality between the natural world and something a bit more tech or urban comes through as well. We've got industrial hardware and these very adaptable, resilient soles that give us a bit of this, enduring quality while still keeping this softened natural component with shearling or scrunchy effects, especially on these buttery soft leathers. When we look at the women's selection, this trend is coming through as well. I think a really interesting piece to keep on the radar is this Nomad sweat boot that has already come through with Isabelle Marant and Anne de Meulemeester in a previous season. But now it's embracing a bit more of commercial traction. It's a nice new model on a flat sole, like without a heel. When we also have the buckles, it has a bit of a survivalist, nomadic character, and definitely in suede is a perfect new option for winter. The second skin flat, we already mentioned yesterday, there's a big vamp up in these Vibram shoes that give us a bit of a symbiotic barefoot experience with the soil, so we connect a bit more to the world around us. As well here, another option for this more high vamp, more covering pump. Here feeling a bit more sturdy, almost like an ankle boot. And then we got the slouchy square toe that is, of course, more of an edgy trend, but playing with the architectural square front, but then the slouchy shaft as this play of future and naturality. Looking at the men's shoes, we have a very interesting piece, I think, with this suede chukka boot, because we have seen the success of the Wallaby, and I think this piece has even a bit more versatile potential because it catches on to formal wear, but it can also be used for casual occasions. So it's a very versatile piece, definitely to keep on the radar. Within this trend, we still look at everything hiking, outdoor ready, utility, but we transform it into, this urban landscape. We have a lot of natural materials, use shearling, suede, nubuck, like natural color gradations, just to keep this piece less like untouchable and like futuristic, but make it something a bit more close to, our identity and close to the earth. And then we got the textured Chelsea boot, which is a very classic piece that is just upgraded with a very tactile brushed suede materials to create a bit of this untamed primal feel. Now we already jump into the last trend of today, which is dark history. So dark history explores footwear as myth-making through dramatic storytelling with styles that can carry narratives of witches, poets, rebels, and rulers through surface and silhouette. I think this is a last but very interesting trend, and to keep in mind, especially when moving to the festive season of these fall-winter collections. We have a lot of these keywords like castlecore, dark fantasy, medieval, starting to emerge as trends. I mean, we have seen that all black and these like very dark, creature-like concepts have already been prominent throughout the previous seasons. But I think now it's really interesting that we are embracing a bit more of the narration part of it all. It's like we live in a time that seems very dark, and that brings a lot of these like uneasy, eerie emotions, a bit uncanny. And we try and just embrace them in order to organize them and to direct them. And I think we take inspiration from, I don't know, like the characters of theater plays or movies that seem so strong and that seem to have handled all of these difficult situations so well that we don't maybe escape the situation, but we try to rewrite history. So we put ourselves in this position so we feel also like we're able to kind of command the moment of crisis. And on Pinterest, for example, there has been this big trend of narration core, castle core, really taking up these knight-inspired characters in order to, influence fashion with something fresh and new and giving us strength. When we look at this concept, I think it's also nice to mention that this trend is, of course, a bit esoterical. So it's giving a bit of a comment on gender identity, on traditions that seem absurd these days, but still to keep in mind, I think it's an interesting story for the festive season. So when we look at the color palette, it's a very old historical grandeur. So we have these darks like the super dark navy, of course the black, and then here you can see this pen into, like even taken away from the plum, but into like a royal purple. We got the classic crimson reds that feel even a bit like brick inspired, and then the olive and this mustard yellow to really ground it in a bit of this medieval Renaissance painting like mood. So looking at this trends materials, we have a lot of ornamental inspiration taken from history, like the Baroque, etc., that can be kind of worked within lace, open work, or even embossing that is adding a bit of this grandeur of the past to the trend. Then we've got high shine vinyl that is, underscoring a bit the idea of these dark theaters, dark circus, dark creature element that is running through the veins of the trend as well. And you can see with 100% increase patent still resonating well with clients. We have seen recently this big interest in mesh. And as I mentioned, the castle core that is trending on Pinterest. We've got chainmail as an interesting new material, especially along the metallic segment that has come throughout the previous fashion shows. When we look at the details, these are quite mainstays of recent collections. So even now on the fair, you see a lot of these elements. We have this theatrical corset like lace up or wrapping. We got toe shapes that feel a bit more experimental, either super squared or squared with a round, so they seem a bit like claws from some dark like creature. And then we've got these asymmetric buckles, which I think is also very important to mention. We have a bit of a military revival. So this kind of military band-inspired look of the 2010s that we saw with a lot of these British indie bands is coming back. And it, of course, matches a bit this costume theater-like moment of this narrative. So looking at the last must-haves of today, we have women's wear with, again, a star product. So another take on the Mary Jane that feels a bit more gothic, a bit more, rebellious and experimental. We've got the lacer boot that is, of course, a very sleek and theatrical take on a historic boot style, especially working well on ankle and on knee boot. Then we've got this sculpted creature mule. So the mule has still been a very high-performing product in recent collections, and definitely with a pointy toe or this peep toe situation, but now moving a bit more eccentric, especially maybe for the festive collections, into something a bit more daring. On the shows, we saw a lot of these very elongated shapes, for example, in Victoria Beckham. So something to keep in mind. And then the harness biker boot that connects a bit to this military, costume influence that I was mentioning. And lastly, for men's shoes, there are some other interesting pieces here. We've got this fold-over tongue sneaker. It's a bit more of the stylized upgrade of the recent trending soccer sneaker, so it's resonating very well with youth subcultures. Then we've got this buckled officer boot tapping into the military influence, and with the combat boot performing super well. It's something to keep in mind. And maybe an interesting option, it's a bit the resurgence of the monk strap, whether that's on a classic shoe or even transformed, I've seen in Konstantinov and like a sneaker. So just an element to keep in mind and bring this buckled experience to other, footwear categories, something very interesting, especially as we see a bit the decline of classic men's footwear. Or another interesting detail to amp it up is the extended square sole that gives some architectural depth here. So what's next? I invite you tomorrow, if you want to learn more about Fall Winter 26, to join Barbara, the founder of Livetrend, who's going to have a talk about consumer shifts at 3 p.m. here. Otherwise, I'm really excited to see you next season when you can explore all of these trends on the tables in this trend area. And I'm very excited to say, please scan the QR code, reach out to Livetrend if you want to always stay ahead of the trend, if you want to know where for your market each trend is positioned, if you want to have all the right insights on which product to have when, in which quantity, in order to reduce overstock and have the best performing assortments. And with that, I say thank you so much for listening to me for this long presentation. I'll be around in the area if you have any questions, if you want to talk AI or trends or anything else. I'm happy to see you. And otherwise, I hope you have a successful rest of the fair and enjoy the day. Thank you.